Okay, so we're starting in with our chapter on the corporation, and this is where we'll finish the term. The next two units, next two modules, relate to the corporation. And so the corporate form of ownership is by far and away the largest form of, or I should say, the largest businesses are corporations, right? And the reason for that is because of access to capital. The old saying goes that it takes money to make money, which is very much true. And the corporate form provides more access to capital and financing and investing due to its limitation of liability for investors and its efficiency in selling bonds and other things of that nature that's unmatched by any other entity. So if you think of all business revenues, and that's revenues from any business that exists, and then all corporate revenues. If you think of all total business revenues as $1, right, then corporate revenues in total are 94 cents of that dollar. So that should give you a feel for the scale and scope of corporations, right? It would be next to impossible if you decided that you fundamentally disagreed with the corporation as a business model and you were not going to support a single corporation. Well, your life would be very difficult, right? Because chances are you wouldn't be able to flip a light switch and use power. You wouldn't be able to go to the store and buy groceries. Corporations, by and large, are the most influential entities that exist in society, right? I mean, we've seen, we've even talked about, particularly in our bankruptcy chapter, how financial institutions, i.e. corporations, have had the ability to influence the law via their lobby and all of this other stuff. So when we're talking about corporations, that's really what we're talking about. I'm going to have you guys watch a documentary on the corporation as well that details the origins of the corporate form of existence. All right, without further ado, let's get into corporation formation and finance. We're going to start with just a discussion of the players, the corporate players. And it starts with the stockholders. Stockholders are the owners of the corporation. Now, typically, in your average corporation, your average publicly traded corporation, there are going to be a lot of stockholders. You may hear me use the word shareholders. Those are interchangeable for our purposes. All right, stockholders and shareholders are the same thing. They are the owners of the corporation, and their main job is the election of the board of directors. So stockholders vote. In your typical corporation, stockholders vote to elect directors. And boards of directors vary in size from usually it's 3 to 9 or 11. Usually it's typically an odd number. That makes voting easier and prevents deadlock. And so the board of directors in your typical company is responsible for your long-range decision-making and planning. They also oversee the audit for publicly traded companies. They also are responsible for the hiring, evaluation, and compensation of your officers, right? Your officers obviously would include president, vice president. More commonly used titles today are CEO, chief executive officer. Anybody with chief in their title is a good chance that they are appointed, evaluated, and compensated by the board of directors. All right? So your CFO, your COO, your CEO, your CITO, which is your chief information technology officer, your chief operational officer, all of those high-ranking managers are elected, now are hired, evaluated, and compensated by the board. It's also not uncommon for some officers to actually have a seat on the board of directors. most common is the chief executive has a seat on the board of directors to kind of serve as a go-between, because keep in mind the board of directors is not going to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. All right, they typically meet, it could be as frequently as monthly, or the most common is quarterly, and they'll vote on certain key contracts and long-range issues. Should we expand into new territory? Those types of things. Whereas the officers are involved in day-to-day operations. The CEO is going to deal with managing the business to his or her best ability on a day-to-day basis. All right. The CFO is going to be interested in ensuring financial compliance. All right. And then, of course, you have employees, which report to officers. All right. So the corporate form, the central premise is that the corporation is a legal person. All right. Which means it can sue and be sued. It can own property. When it's sued, it is designed to take the loss, if there is a loss. It's designed to pay that loss without the owners having to be personally liable. And that's the general rule. We'll talk about the exceptions to that. All right. We already talked about shareholders, board of directors, and officers. Talk about taxation. So U.S.-based corporations do pay corporate tax to the Internal Revenue Service. All right. And there's a whole corporate tax structure. When that corporation elects to distribute retained earnings to its shareholders, the shareholders are taxed. Those dividends, that's a distribution of profits, those dividends are taxed to the shareholders as well. So you have that double taxation problem, which is the single biggest drawback for the corporate form.